She stood under the bright stage lights, microphone in hand, her confidence glowing like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. "You know," she said with a half smile, "some men just can't keep up. My husband's a great guy, but too small for my world." Laughter rippled through the room. I was sitting in the second row, the badge on my chest reading guest, spouse. I'd driven 3 hours just to be there, thinking it mattered to support her. But in that instant, surrounded by polished executives and flashing cameras, I realized I was nothing more than her punchline. She didn't even glance my way. She kept talking about growth, ambition, breaking limits, while glancing toward her company's CEO, a man twice divorced, dripping in money and charm, whose hand I'd seen resting a little too comfortably on her back at dinner the night before. What no one in that room knew was that I'd been awake till 2 a.m. the previous night. Not because of nerves, but because I'd checked the footage from our shared cloud drive. The hotel security system automatically backed up recordings from our suite door. At exactly 11:42 p.m., I saw her enter the hallway in a silk robe, knock softly on the CEO's door, and slip inside. I didn't confront her. I didn't even feel anger then, just a cold, hollow kind of silence. I took the clip, trimmed it down to 23 seconds, and added one sentence of text overlay. This was her real keynote last night. Then I saved it onto the USB drive she had left in the laptop bag, the one her assistant was supposed to load the conference presentation from. So when she stood there, basking in applause, I was already watching the timer on my phone count down to her next slide. The audience laughed again, unaware. My pulse barely moved. I had no plans to shout, argue, or make a scene. I just waited. And as I waited, I couldn't help replaying the months that led us here. The subtle shift in her tone, the way she started calling me by my name instead of babe, the way she'd say networking trip with that distant smile. She once told me I wasn't ambitious enough, that I was content with small things. She was right, I guess. I wanted a quiet life, a house we could both breathe in, not a stage she could stand on. But now, sitting there under the harsh lights, I realized she'd built her own downfall on that same stage. She just didn't know it yet. When the slide deck advanced, the screen flickered, the lights dimmed, and for a brief second, the audience saw her. Not in her blazer, but wrapped in that silk robe, stepping through the CEO's door. A gasp rolled through the room like thunder. Her voice cracked mid-sentence, the microphone feeding back. The CEO froze 2 rows behind me, his face draining of color. And I just sat there, silent, calm, the kind of calm that comes after months of pretending not to see what's right in front of you. Subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge. The sound that followed was the kind you never forget. Not a scream, not even a cry, but that stunned inhale people make when they realize the world they built just shattered. She froze on stage, eyes darting between the screen and the faces staring up at her. The video looped once before her assistant scrambled to pull the plug, fumbling with cables while the conference host whispered something frantically into a headset. The CEO stood up, but not toward her. He walked straight out the side door, jaw clenched, not even glancing back. And I just sat there, hands folded, expression still. People turned, whispering, trying to piece together what they'd just seen. I caught one woman in the front row covering her mouth, another man laughing under his breath, muttering, "Oh my God, that's her?" Cameras were still rolling. This was a streamed event. Whatever she said from that podium had already gone out to hundreds watching online. I saw her lips tremble, saw her glance around like a child who'd lost her line in a school play. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. I didn't stay long enough to see her finish. I stood up quietly, adjusted my jacket, and walked out through the side aisle. No one stopped me. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright. I could still hear the muffled chaos from the hall, echoing behind me like a faraway storm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 2 missed calls, both from her. I didn't answer. I drove back to the hotel, packed my things, and left her keycard on the nightstand. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume, but now it felt like something stale, something artificial that lingered too long after the truth. As I walked down the hall, I passed the CEO's door. It was slightly ajar, suitcase open, a tie half hanging out. He was gone. Just like that, two people who thought they could rewrite the story without consequences had watched it play on the biggest screen of their careers. The drive home felt endless. Empty highways, gas stations glowing in the dark, my reflection staring back from the windshield. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. It was something else. A quiet acceptance that the person I thought I loved didn't exist anymore. She'd been replaced by someone who wanted applause more than affection. I thought about the last real conversation we'd had. She was sitting by the mirror, putting on makeup for another networking dinner. I told her I missed her. She smiled and said, "You'll understand when you're more driven." That was the last time she touched my face. The truth is, I'd been driven all along, just not in the direction she wanted. While she chased admiration, I built stability. I bought our house, paid off her student loans, even helped fund her first business pitch. But to her, those things didn't shine under the lights. She wanted cameras, speeches, spotlights. I wanted peace. In her eyes, peace meant stagnation. When I got home that evening, the house felt like an echo chamber. Her shoes still by the door, her favorite mug still on the counter, the one that said, "Boss Lady." I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint ring mark her mug had left on the wood. Then my phone rang again. Her face on the screen, eyes red, makeup smeared. I didn't answer that either. I imagined what she was saying to the organizers, to the audience, to her team, spinning it into something professional, maybe calling it a technical error. But deep down, she knew exactly what it was. The mirror moment she'd avoided for years. That night, around 10:30, I heard the tires on the gravel driveway. She hadn't even changed clothes. The same suit, the same heels, just without the confidence. She came in without knocking. "How could you?" she said, voice breaking halfway. I didn't reply. I just poured her a glass of water and set it down in front of her. She sat, shoulders shaking, eyes full of disbelief. "You humiliated me," she whispered. I finally looked at her and said, "No, you did that the second you forgot who was standing beside you all those years." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it away. For a long moment, we just sat there, two people surrounded by ghosts of their own choices. Then she said, "It didn't mean anything." I nodded once. "Neither does this conversation." I stood up, took my jacket, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just left her sitting in silence, because that silence was the one thing she'd never learned to handle. As I drove away, the headlights cut through the mist, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to freedom. The kind that doesn't come from revenge, but from finally letting go of the noise. I didn't go far that night. I stopped at a small roadside diner about 20 miles out, the kind that never closes and smells like burnt coffee and old memories. The waitress looked tired but kind, the type who'd seen every kind of heartbreak sit in that same corner booth. I ordered black coffee and a slice of whatever pie was left. She poured the cup, gave me a faint smile and said, "Rough night." I didn't answer, just nodded. She didn't ask again. That quiet human decency, the kind that expects nothing in return, was more comforting than anything my wife had said in years. My phone buzzed again. Dozens of messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up. I didn't open a single one. I knew the rhythm by now, denial first, then guilt, then bargaining. She'd start by blaming me for going too far, then shift to begging me not to throw away everything. The irony of that word wasn't lost on me. She'd thrown it away long before I ever pressed play on that screen. Around midnight, a message came from her sister, the one who never really liked me. "I can't believe you'd embarrass her like that," it said. I almost laughed. People see the explosion but never the years of gas leaking quietly in the dark. No one saw the nights I stayed awake wondering why she didn't answer, the excuses that never added up, the way she'd flinch when her phone buzzed after 11 p.m. They only saw a 20-second video and assumed I'd turned cruel overnight. By morning, the conference clip had already gone viral. Someone had recorded it from the audience and posted it with the caption, "Motivational speaker gets exposed by her own husband, live on stage." The comments were brutal. Some called it karma, some called it abuse. I didn't read too far. The truth is, no one really knows what happens inside a marriage. Everyone just loves a story. I paid the bill, left a generous tip, and drove until sunrise. The world looked cleaner somehow, sharper. When I got home, her car was gone. The house was still. For a few days, I tried to settle back into life, but silence has a way of echoing too loud when it's empty. Her closet hung half full. The smell of her perfume lingered in the hallway, a haunting reminder that comfort and betrayal can share the same air. She finally showed up 3 days later, right before dusk. I heard the car door, slow footsteps up the porch, a hesitant knock. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look small, younger somehow, like she'd run out of masks to wear. "I'm sorry," she said, voice thin as glass. "I lost everything. My job, my credibility. The board suspended me." I nodded slowly. "You'll rebuild," I said flatly. "You're good at reinventing yourself." She winced, then tried to meet my eyes. "It wasn't love," she whispered. "It was a mistake." I wanted to believe her, but the truth sat heavy in my chest. Mistakes don't last months. They don't sneak through hotel hallways or whisper jokes about the man waiting at home. They're choices, small, deliberate, repeated choices that stack until they crush whatever they once stood on. "I just need a chance to explain," she said, stepping closer. "You had your chance," I replied. "You took it on stage." Her lip quivered, and she took a breath like she wanted to scream but couldn't find the air. "You're cruel," she said softly. I almost smiled at that. "No," I said. "Cruelty would have been letting you believe there wouldn't be consequences." For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two strangers sharing the ruins of what used to be a marriage. Then she turned, walked back to her car, and sat there for a long while before driving off. I thought that was the end of it. But life doesn't close doors cleanly. A week later, I received a letter from her lawyer. Not about divorce, but about defamation. They were claiming I'd intentionally damaged her professional reputation. I almost laughed again. She'd already done that herself. I sent everything to my attorney, who advised me not to worry. "The evidence speaks for itself," he said. I knew it did. Still, the absurdity of it all made me realize how deep her need for control ran. Even after being caught, she needed to rewrite the story, to make herself the victim in the narrative she'd built on ambition and lies. One evening, I walked into what used to be her office. Awards on the shelves, motivational quotes framed in gold, her vision board still pinned with photos of conferences and magazine covers. I stood there for a long time, staring at those words, "Build your own empire," and I thought maybe that's what she did. She built one and then burned it herself. I took down the frames one by one, stacked them in a box, and carried them to the garage. The house felt lighter after that. I made myself dinner, simple pasta and wine, and sat by the window watching the sunset. I realized that for the first time in years, there was no performance, no pretense, no waiting for someone to come home who'd already left long ago. Just me, silence, and the strange peace of knowing I'd finally stopped playing the fool in someone else's show. A few days later, she showed up again, this time without warning. I was in the backyard fixing the fence when I heard her voice, quiet, almost unsure, calling my name from the gate. She wasn't dressed like the woman I used to know. No heels, no polished suit, just jeans and a sweatshirt that didn't quite fit. Her confidence was gone, replaced by the kind of fragility that makes even anger feel unnecessary. "Can we talk?" she asked, gripping the fence post. I shrugged, wiped my hands on a towel and said, "If you think there's still something left to say." She hesitated, then stepped inside. For a moment, it felt like the old rhythm. The sound of her shoes on the patio, the faint smell of her shampoo carried by the wind, but it was gone as quickly as it came. We sat at the table beneath the tree we planted together on our first anniversary. She stared at it, then said softly, "You used to tell me this tree would outlast us." I nodded. It did. She closed her eyes, and a single tear slid down her cheek. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just I wanted you to know I never stopped loving you. That sentence used to mean something. Now it just sounded like a line from one of her speeches. I didn't respond. She waited, then looked at me and whispered, "You could have destroyed me completely, but you didn't." Why? I leaned back in my chair. Because I wanted the truth to destroy the lie, not you. There's a difference. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved through the leaves above us, and the silence between us grew heavier. Then she said, "They took everything. My contracts, my sponsorships, my position. Even my mentor stopped taking my calls." I could hear the disbelief in her tone, like she still couldn't process that the same world she once commanded could vanish overnight. "You built your world on applause," I said quietly. "But applause fades the moment the lights go out." She bit her lip, eyes downcast. "I thought success would make me feel alive," she murmured. But the higher I climbed, the emptier it felt. I kept trying to fill that space with attention, admiration, and I hurt the only person who actually loved me. I looked at her and said, "You didn't hurt me because you fell for someone else. You hurt me because you made me feel small for loving you honestly." That landed like a brick. She looked away, hands trembling slightly. I could see the regret settling in, not the performative kind she wore for sympathy, but the raw, stripped-down version that comes too late to fix anything. "I can't go back to that life," she said finally. "No one will hire me. They say I'm toxic publicity now." I almost felt pity. Almost. "You can start over," I said. "Just not here." She nodded, wiped her eyes, and stood up. "You really mean that, don't you?" I met her gaze. "I've never been clearer." She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something more, then thought better of it. Instead, she took a small envelope from her purse and set it on the table. "It's the deed," she said quietly. "To the house. I transferred everything to you. I don't deserve it. I didn't touch it." "You can leave it," I said. "I'll deal with it later." She gave a small, broken laugh. "You always were calm, even now." I looked at her for the last time. Calm doesn't mean unhurt. It just means I'm done bleeding for someone who never noticed. She stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the gate. I watched her leave, not with hatred, not even sadness, just the kind of detachment that comes when you finally realize some chapters don't need closure, only distance. When her car disappeared down the road, I sat back down and stared at the tree. The afternoon sun filtered through its branches, casting slow-moving shadows on the table. For the first time, I didn't see her face in everything around me. The house no longer felt haunted by what we'd lost. It felt like it was waiting to breathe again. Later that night, I went inside and found the envelope still where she'd left it. I opened it, and along with the deed, there was a short handwritten note. "You were always the better one. I just didn't want to admit it." I folded it once and placed it in the drawer, not because I needed to remember, but because I wanted to remind myself what truth costs when pride runs the show. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone. Some people asked, of course, neighbors, colleagues, but I gave them the same answer every time. We grew apart. It was simpler than explaining that love sometimes dies, not with a fight, but with applause from the wrong audience. A few weeks later, I got an email from an unknown address. It was her. She was volunteering at a local shelter, trying to rebuild her life. The message was brief. "I hope you're okay. I'm learning to be small again." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the email and deleted it. Not out of anger, but peace. Because finally, she was right about something. Some worlds are better left separate. Months passed, and life slowly settled into something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet, predictable, steady. I woke up without checking my phone for her messages, cooked breakfast without waiting for footsteps on the stairs, and went to work without the dull ache that used to sit behind every smile. The house was still but not empty anymore. Felt like mine. Sometimes I'd catch a faint echo of her laughter buried in an old voicemail, her perfume still clinging to one of my shirts. But those ghosts faded faster each day. I focused on small things. Fixing the porch light, planting new flowers by the mailbox, repainting the living room walls. Each task was a tiny act of reclaiming space. Healing doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from quiet repetitions of choosing yourself after being chosen last for too long. One evening, I received an invitation from her former company. It was for a new leadership summit, different venue, new faces, a rebrand after the scandal. The email must have been a leftover from when she listed me on their mailing list as a supporting partner. I almost deleted it, but something made me click through. On the lineup of speakers, I noticed her name again, but this time listed at the bottom with a single title, Guest Panelist, Resilience and Accountability. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd found a way back, or at least was trying to. I didn't feel anger, not even curiosity, just a kind of detached acceptance that she'd always need an audience to breathe. The difference now was that I no longer cared to sit in it. That night, I poured a drink, sat by the window, and watched the rain slide down the glass. Somewhere out there, she was probably rehearsing again, perfecting another speech about lessons learned, about growth and redemption. Maybe she meant it this time. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. My peace no longer depended on her sincerity. A few weeks later, I ran into one of her old colleagues at a coffee shop downtown. He didn't recognize me at first, then did a double take. "Hey, you're, her husband, right?" I smiled faintly. "Ex-husband now." He looked awkward, like he wanted to apologize for something he hadn't done. "She talks about you, you know. Says she deserved what happened. Says you were kind." I nodded once. "That's generous of her." He hesitated. "She's different now, quieter. She doesn't even stay for after-parties anymore." I almost laughed at that, but just said, "Good. Maybe she finally learned that applause fades faster than regret." When I left the cafe, I felt something strange. Not triumph, not bitterness, just closure. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't come with music or dramatic goodbyes. Just the quiet realization that the story was done, and I didn't need to reread it anymore. Time moved on. I started running again in the mornings, joined a small local book club, even took a short trip alone to the mountains. I thought being alone would feel like punishment, but it felt like freedom instead. There's a certain beauty in solitude when it's no longer tied to loneliness. Sometimes at night I'd scroll through my old photos, not to torture myself but to remember the man I was before her world swallowed mine. The man who laughed easily, who built things with his hands, who believed love was a partnership, not a performance. He was still there, waiting patiently to be found. The last trace of her came one afternoon in early spring. I received a small package with no return address. Inside was a framed photograph of the two of us from our first year together, standing in front of that same conference stage, arms around each other, smiling like the world was small enough to hold. There was a note taped to the back. "Thank you for setting me free, even when I didn't understand why you had to." I sat there for a while, holding that photo, feeling something soft stir where resentment used to live. Then I placed it in a drawer beside her old note, the one that said I was the better one. I didn't need to throw them away. They weren't poison anymore. They were lessons, reminders of how far I'd come from the man who once mistook silence for weakness. A year later, that same company invited me, not her, to speak at their internal event about integrity in leadership. Apparently, the video from that night had become a case study on corporate ethics and personal accountability. Life has a dark sense of humor sometimes. I walked on stage, calm and collected, looking out at rows of unfamiliar faces waiting for me to speak. For a second, I thought of her, of that moment when her world cracked open in front of a crowd, and then I exhaled and began. "Sometimes," I said, "truth doesn't destroy. It just clears the stage so something honest can finally begin." When the applause came, it wasn't loud or wild. It was quiet, steady, real. And for the first time, I didn't feel small at all. Subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you'll ever do.